When I'm 40, I hope I'm in prison. I wrote the title for this talk, having worked in prisons for about 5 years now, and it's become something of an obsession, you might say, of mine, a passion. It's a slightly odd one, perhaps. I work sometimes in prison, I have studied prisons, I've thought about them a great deal, and now I think a lot about the politics of prison and the structure of prisons. I've learned a lot working in prison about myself, about the society in which we live, about other people. And the anniversary of the suffragettes this year made me think about, was there anything I would do against the law because I believed in it so much that might land me in a different kind of prison experience, one where I was the person being incarcerated. So when I'm 40, I hope I'm in prison. We all know, hopefully, that prison sucks. It's a terrible place. There are quarters of our press that like us to believe it's like a holiday camp and wall-to-wall homebrew hooch and all-night sessions on the PlayStation. They neglect to mention the sound of crying at night because people are separated from their children. They neglect to mention the same food on a Monday as the next Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday. Oh, it's Friday food, Saturday food, Sunday food. They neglect to mention the fact that you can't attend weddings or perhaps the birth of your niece or nephew. You can't go to people's funerals. You miss out on the dying breaths of people that you love. You grieve alone. They miss out on the fact that you might share a cell with someone who screams every night because of their past trauma in their sleep. Prison is awful, and the only similarity I've seen to a holiday camp is the dormitory-style accommodation and the plastic crockery. So it dawned on me, why do I say when I'm 40 I hope I'm in prison? It's only my privilege that makes me able to say that. So when I was a teenager, I indulged in some fairly bad behaviours, which in a different family, in a different town, probably would have been a one-way road to prison. But my parents reined me in. My friends' parents expected them to come home at night. None of my parents' friends groomed us or sold us for sexual favours or gave us drink when we were 12, or all kinds of the other things that I've heard about in prison. So I speak from an extreme position of privilege when I make that statement, when I'm 40, I hope I'm in prison. So there's a bit of an unresolved hypocrisy for me in this talk, because I want to talk about the structures that make it so, the society that we live in, and yet here I am, possibly reifying my own privileged position by talking about it as someone with some kind of knowledge. So when I cried as a baby, somebody picked me up. They changed my nappy, they fed me, they didn't just leave me in my own filth. And when I go into prison, it's a bit of a counselling cliche that perhaps their mothers didn't love them enough. Who's heard that one? There's that idea that if you don't get enough love as a baby, it's a problem. It is a problem. For children in prison, I'm talking about 10 to 17-year-olds now, 39% of them have been on a child protection register before they end up in prison. That means there's some kind of neglect or abuse going on in their lives. That's very serious. And there's been some recent research that shows that a child's brain develops, most importantly, between 0 and 2 years. And when you look at a picture of a child that's been neglected and a child that's been well loved at 2 years old, you see there's a difference in the size of their brain and that their neural pathways are beginning to map differently because of that neglect. So, as well as being a counselling cliche, there might be something in this idea that if your mother didn't love you enough as a baby, that's where it starts to go wrong. And from there, I wasn't in care like 44% of young women in prison. I haven't experienced any domestic violence like 46% of women in prison. I haven't experienced any kind of childhood abuse, unlike 53% of the women in prison. I am white. In this country, we have about 10% of our population that would identify as black minority ethnic. In prison, that figure is 25%, massively overrepresented. I don't have a learning difficulty like 30% of people in our prisons. I haven't got a Class A drug habit like 64% of people in our prisons. I have a job, unlike 68% of people who are in prison for 4 weeks before they went in. I have had some mental health issues, and I share this with 72% of people in our prisons. That's who is in our prison system. And one prison I worked in, there was a guy who's very, very brain damaged from a car accident. And when we said to the staff, why is this man here and not in a secure hospital, they said, well, it's £25,000 a year, this prison, and the secure mental hospital is £120,000 a year, so they keep him here because it's cheaper. That, to to me isn't justice. And in 1993, we had a prison population of around 41,800 people. Fast forward 20 years later, we have a prison population of 83,000. And that makes me think, well, it's got a bit more dangerous, what's going on in our country. But when I read the British Crime Survey, it tells me that crime has fallen, that serious crime is at an all-time low. So why have we got twice the prison population? Is it our punitive press? Is it our unequal society? Is it the huge rates of reoffending that suggests that prison, far from rehabilitation and redemption, just is a criminogenic factor? Is it about this infantilizing culture where we say to people, take responsibility for your crime, take responsibility for yourself, but while you're in here, we're going to tell you when to get up, when to eat, when to go to bed, what to do, where to move to? Is it about a culture that's sprung up of blame and shame, where crime is not my problem, but it's somebody else's problem in a far-off place? I'd also like to suggest that structurally we found ourselves in a situation where the UK has more private prisons than any other country in Europe. So there's a whole other agenda when a company comes in, runs a prison for profit. It's in their interest to have people in prison for longer and to have more prisons, because then their shareholders can make more money. So come on a journey with me, because it's not enough for me just to be a member of the Prison Reform Trust and to espouse structural reform. If you close your eyes for a moment and imagine a toolbox in front of you, and into your toolbox you reach, you rummage around, and you pull out your conceptual spanner. Okay, you can open your eyes again if you've closed them. This is what we need, because to make this story different for my children and my grandchildren, we need our conceptual spanners. We need to dismantle the structures that make this so, that make those statistics so alarming and so true. We need to think with our conceptual spanner about, who do I know? Do I know anyone who's in prison or affected by it? If not, why not? Do I need to get out of my ghetto? We need to think about, what do I think about the fact that people make a profit out of prison? We need to think, what is this thing about shame in our society that makes it hard to be vulnerable and to express love and to look for ways out of shame? It's about turning away from that culture of blame, of playing safe, and of separating ourselves from other people who we think are so very different, perhaps, to ourselves. It's about rejecting this kind of neoliberal lie of financially motivated, measurable things count the most, of more is always better, of the best things I've achieved I've done on my own. Because these are the lies that are rotting and breaking our society and giving us this very, very unjust prison system. The future of our prison system depends on us using our conceptual spanners and not being lazy. If we want less victims of crime, and if we want to honour the previous victims of crime, we have to zoom out. We're not going to solve this problem if we keep using the same thinking that created it. So I encourage you, for the future of our society, to ask the difficult questions, to zoom out and say, what is the big picture that makes this so? So, I'd like to suggest this is our problem. Crime is our problem. Crime is about housing, it's about healthcare, it's about communities, it's about the kind of love that can blast out shame. That shame of childhood abuse that maybe turned you to drugs, that made you steal all that stuff and got you in that situation where you looked after a shotgun, for example. How can we begin to unpick the narrative of shame and start to own this thing as our crime, our problem? I'd like to suggest we want to create a world of hope with our conceptual spanners. This is our society and our lives. I'd like to suggest that you fill up your heart with love, because it's a horrible world out there at times. Fill up your heart with love, go with your conceptual spanner, and get your hands dirty. Get involved. This is not somebody else's problem. It is our problem, and the only way to change it is by getting on it. So, with that, when I'm 40, I would love to see you all in prison. Thank you.